If it's Monday, voters are fired up. Our new NBC News poll shows interest in the midterms is higher than it's ever been. With early voting now in full swing in many of the most critical states, Americans are eager to cast their ballots, but they're as angry and polarized as ever. Plus, it's still the economy. Jobs and cost of living are top of mind for voters in our poll. What does it all mean for the midterms? And the U.S. and NATO reject Russia's claim that Ukraine is planning to use a dirty bomb, fueling new fears of just how far Russia is willing to go 8 months into the war. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. We are just 15 days out from the 2022 midterm elections, if you can believe it, and voters are voting as we speak. Early voting is now underway in 31 states, and data from our partners at Target Smart shows that more than 7.5 million voters have already cast their ballots. Now, according to our new NBC News poll, voter interest is at an all-time high, with a majority of Americans saying these congressional elections are more important than past midterms. And our poll shows voters are both energized and polarized right now, with voters in both parties seeing the other side as an existential threat to the country. Take a look at some of these figures. 81% of Democrats and 79% of Republicans said they believe the political opposition poses a threat that, if not stopped, will destroy America as we know it. And for the third straight time in our poll, voters say threats to democracy are the most important issue facing the country. President Biden tried to fire up Democrats at the DNC headquarters today.
But we just have 15 days until one of the most important elections in our lifetime. And it's going to shape the way this country looks like for the coming decade, for real. Everybody wants to make it a referendum, but it's a choice between two vastly different visions for America, significantly different. Democrats are building a better America for everyone, with an economy that grows from the bottom up and the middle out, where everyone does well. Republicans are doubling down on their MAGA trickle-down economics that benefits the very wealthy, failed the country before, and will fail it again if they win.
And as we said, this electorate is not just polarized, it's energized too. Enthusiasm for these midterms is sky high, with 70% of all voters expressing very high interest in the midterm elections. As you can see right here, that includes 78% of Republicans and 69% of Democrats. While both numbers are lofty, there is a gap there. Republicans are more enthusiastic than Democrats. For a time this summer, Democrats had closed the enthusiasm gap, but now it is back to a 9-point advantage for the GOP. And that gap is reflected in the generic congressional ballot that's nearly evenly split, with Democrats up 1 among registered voters, but Republicans up 1 among likely voters, thanks to their edge in enthusiasm. NBC's Steve Kornacki is at the big board to break more of this poll down for us. I'm also joined by Mike Memoli with the latest from the White House. And Ali Vitale is down in Florida ahead of tonight's big governor's debate and as early voting is getting underway. Steve, of course, we have to start with you at the big board. Break down what could be the most impactful numbers for these midterms and what you're watching.
Yeah, Christy, it gets a lot to the mood of the country, especially when it comes to the economy. We keep seeing in our poll and in other polls how folks feel the economy, inflation. These are defining issues for them right now. And you just ask that basic question of the direction the country is heading in. Look at this. Only 20%, 1 in 5 voters say the country's heading in the right direction. 71%, you're getting close to 3/4, say it's on the wrong track. That's the worst that right track, wrong track number has been in one of our polls at this point in a midterm cycle. So again, Democrats controlling the presidency, the House and the Senate, to have numbers like that, that creates a very troubling climate if you're a Democrat right now. Along those same lines, again, on the economy here, Biden's approval rating specifically on the economy, under 40%, his disapproval rating approaching 60%. Again, that number as high as it's been, not in the way you want it to be for president, this close to a midterm election in our polling. And then just the climate, sort of the air of pessimism when it comes to the economy. Look at this, 50%. That is half the electorate believes that over the next year, the economy is going to get worse.
Yeah, that's a real danger zone for the president and for his party. There's no doubt about that. And of course, as we said at the top, it's still the economy. The number 2 and 3 issues in this poll for voters were both about economic issues. So what are the key takeaways there, Steve?
Yeah, and I think it's number 2 and it's number 3. When you put those two together, the economy and inflation, it adds up to 35% of the electorate. So what that means is more than 1 out of every 3 voters are either saying the economy or inflation is their top issue as they make up their mind. And when you look at that, the people that fall into that category, how are they breaking? They are breaking 4 Republicans by 36 points. So that's the most consequential issue to voters. The economy, inflation, if you merge them together, is a nearly 40-point advantage for Republicans. So yes, Democrats, when you're talking about abortion, you're talking about threats to democracy, Democrats do well there. But that is dwarfed in our poll, and we see this in others. When you start talking economy and inflation, you're talking trouble for Democrats with the voters.
Yeah, that is why we've seen the president talking about the economy so much recently. And Mike, he is predicting there will be a shift back to Democrats' side. What did we hear from him today when he spoke at the DNC headquarters? 14 days out now.
Yeah, Kristen, you made the point exactly right. The White House, in most of the president's public appearances over these last few weeks, has chosen to focus on that issue of the economy, which, as Steve lays out, is the number 1 concern for so many voters. And you heard the president get much more sharp with his rhetoric today, saying that Republicans would shut down the government, would make inflation worse, would lead to chaos if they controlled the House and or the Senate, warning about the risk of a debt ceiling default, that we know that fight is really looming after the midterm elections, potentially, if Republicans do take back control of the House. But I thought, Kristen, one of the more interesting moments of the president's remarks today were when he was speaking not as a political messenger, but as a pundit. He really did weigh in on these polls that we're seeing, talking about the fact that he thinks pollsters are really having a rough time even just measuring the attitudes of the country at the moment. He also did sort of acknowledge, I think, the fact that as we've seen numbers go back and forth over these last few months, that, as he put it, there will be one more shift to the Democrats' direction. That's a real acknowledgement, of course, that right now they're not going things are not going Democrats' way at the moment. But it really is, I think, important to note where the president as well gave that speech today. Here in Washington, Kristen, we know that the president is going to be traveling a bit this week. He's giving a speech on Thursday talking about the CHIPS bill and other economic accomplishments he wants to tout. And then Friday night speaking at a party fundraising dinner in all-important Pennsylvania. But this is still a president who is mostly speaking from the sidelines in these midterm elections. Karine Jean-Pierre was just asked about this in the last few moments at the White House press briefing, and she said, listen, the president is delivering a message to the country almost every day that what his role is in these midterm elections is to sort of make the argument about what's at stake and then leave it for the individual candidates to make an argument for or against, for themselves or against their opponents.
Yeah, Mike, let me follow up with you very quickly because the strategy is so fascinating. And of course, he's held fewer big traditional rallies than his predecessors, former President Trump, former President Obama. The White House has been pretty defiant about it. They say, well, they didn't have much success in their midterm cycles doing that. So we're doing it a little bit differently. But based on our reporting, it sounds like in that home stretch, Mike, we are going to see the more traditional rallies start to be unfurled.
Yeah, you're right, Kristen. They really are really bristling at this conversation about rallies or lack thereof. They do say he's going to be appearing more on the trail in these closing weeks. But I think it's important, really, as Biden would say, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. Let's compare Biden to Biden. In 2018, the former vice president at the time was actually engaged in a lot of these rallies. He was in a lot of swing districts, swing states. He had more than a dozen rallies in the closing weeks after Labor Day in the 2018 midterm elections. Now, though, he's in office. Steve laid out those tough poll numbers for the president. That's why he's not engaged in the same way that he was just 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you bring up Steve, because, Steve, I want to go back to you to make one more point on all of this before we head down to Allie in Florida.
Yeah, no, one other number that I think looms here as a wild card. We talk about all the trouble Democrats have here, but the bottom line on that generic ballot poll is we still have it close. And you ask me, why are Democrats still in the game? You could talk about abortion, certainly. You could talk about that idea of threats to democracy, which I think sort of intersects with this. This from the poll here, just the positive, negative scores for Biden, for Democrats, for Republicans, and Trump. And what jumps out at you is this. Biden's not that popular. The Democratic Party's not that popular. They're both underwater, more negative than positive. But you know who and what is even less popular? The Republican Party and Donald Trump. And this is just a unique midterm climate where the former president is a lot more prominent. His fingerprints are all over a lot of these Republican candidacies. A lot of these Republicans are out there echoing Trump's claims about the 2020 election. And when you see numbers like this, you're looking at voter interest like we're seeing right now. That's one thing Democrats are hoping for, that ultimately there's going to be a voter out there who's not nuts about Biden, not nuts about what the Democrats have done with the power they've had the last 2 years, but he's going to look at the Republican on their ballot, and this is going to be their reaction, and they're not going to be able to vote Republican because of it.
Well, and I'm so glad that you raised those numbers because certainly they are looming over everything. And Steve and Mike, thank you both so much for that. And Allie, look, those are the types of numbers that are going to be looming over the debate tonight, where you have Governor Ron DeSantis and Charlie Crist facing off. What are you expecting? And obviously, former President Trump looms large, particularly when you're talking about a Ron DeSantis, who we know has his eye on a potential run in 2024.
Yeah, Trump looms large over DeSantis, over Florida, over this entire midterm. And I think what Steve and Mike do so well here is they talk about how these are the national trends, but nothing that's happening in Florida happens in a vacuum. And what's fascinating is that for DeSantis's part, he is trying to both pick up the national trend when it comes to talking about the economy, talking about inflation, talking about crime, homing those as parts of his key messaging points. On the other side of this, you've got Charlie Crist doing the same, what we see from many national Democrats, talking about reproductive access, trying to get his base excited from that perspective, also trying to tie DeSantis to the more radical parts of the Republican Party for all of the reasons that Steve just pointed out in that poll. But there's also the interesting wrinkle for DeSantis here, because you're right, he does have future national aspirations, potentially looking at a run for president just in the next few months as the calendar year turns to 2023. This re-election is a springboard for him, but he is now having to do this dance of both sticking close to the former president, but also charting his own path as a lawmaker who has been atop this state now for several years and who's trying to reason with voters that he wants a second term as governor. And by and large, the polling shows that he is on top of this race. He has a healthy margin. You and I both know Florida well. It's not a state that's known for elections that have massive margins of victory here. So nevertheless, even when you look at those polling, you have to imagine it's going to tighten come election day. But still, for DeSantis, many people are looking at this as a springboard to what's next, even as he rides many of the national trends that we're hearing about from Republicans in governor's races, Senate races, House races, all over the map.
Yeah, and I think you're so smart to point that out, Allie. The fact that he has this lead, the power of incumbency. What is the sense there on the ground that Charlie Crist would need to accomplish tonight to turn this race around, if it's even possible at this point with just 14 days left?
Yeah, look, I never say never, especially ahead of debate stages. DeSantis is someone who we have seen have viral moments that cut against him. I think specifically of when I was down here covering his 2018 race. At that point, he was running against Andrew Gillum. That race was within the margin of error ultimately when it shook out. It was like 0.4 or less % because it went to a recount. So he has been someone who has won by very tight margins in the past. For Charlie Crist, I think it's also just the larger landscape here in Florida. It's a state that Trump won in 2016, in 2020. The trend has been with Republicans here in terms of ground game and momentum. Many national Democrats and Republicans that I both talk to privately will agree that Florida is still a swing state, but it's one that swings a little bit more in the red column lately. Whether or not Democrats are going to be able to disrupt that this cycle, we'll see. But at the same time, at the governor's level, you've got to look at the fact that DeSantis has had a consistent and commanding lead here for basically the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely. So much at stake tonight. Allie Vitale, you're going to be there for all of it. Always appreciate your great reporting and analysis. Good to see you. Thank you. And joining me now is Nevada Democratic Congresswoman Susie Lee, who's on the ballot in what's expected to be a tight race in southern Nevada. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Kristen. Great to be here.
I do want to start on what seems to consistently be the biggest issue for voters, the economy. As you know all too well, Republicans have blamed Democratic policies. They say that there has been spending run amok, COVID funding, the Inflation Reduction Act. They say that's responsible for the current state of the economy. What do you say to voters who do feel as though Democrats are to blame for inflation, for the high price of gas?
Well, listen, first and foremost, inflation is not a United States only issue. It is high across the globe as a result of the pandemic, certainly in what's happening in Ukraine. What I say to voters and what voters understand here, especially in a state like Nevada, where we were ground zero for the economic devastation being a tourist-based industry. So whether it was the CARES Act or the American Rescue Plan, we really prevented our economy from bottoming out. But then you got to look what we have done since then. Major investment in our with the bipartisan infrastructure package, investment in our supply chains and bringing back chip manufacturing to America. And especially here, a bill that I was the sponsor of was the Large-Scale Water Recycling Act to deal with drought. And so this is not just about what's been in the past. It's about positioning us for the future. And Republicans have no solutions in their platform.
Congresswoman, do you regret any of those votes? Do you worry any of them could cost you re-election?
Listen, 2 years ago, or at the pandemic, the unemployment rate here was 34%. Today, it's 4.4%. Our major industry, gaming, has had record month after month revenue months. So we are in a position to move forward in this economy. And again, this is about not just basically preventing our economy from bottoming out, but positioning us for the future.
So it sounds like that's a no. It sounds like you're saying you don't regret those votes.
No, listen, we made major investments in renewable energy. Nevada is well poised to be a beneficiary of that. When I'm out in my community talking to small businesses, they're thanking me because without the support that we passed, they would be closed right now.
Yeah. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi seemed to be concerned about the overall messaging that she's seeing on the trail, that she's concerned that Democrats need a sharper message when it comes to the economy. Do you think that's possible with 2 weeks to go? Is that a fair criticism?
Listen, I think everyone runs in their district. And in this district, I am running against a woman who is an election denier. She is a pro-life candidate, which has been supported by the National Right to Life Committee, which wants to ban abortion nationwide. And I have yet to see any solution for the economy. So we've delivered. We delivered the infrastructure package. We delivered the CHIPS package, the American Rescue Plan, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which puts money in seniors' pockets, saves a family of four here in Nevada between $4,000 and $4,500 on health insurance. I mean, we have taken action to address inflation, and Republicans use it as a talking point.
And Congresswoman, and you're talking about the issues that are specific there to Nevada. Gas is still over $5 a gallon. How do you convince I know it's come down since last year, but how do you convince voters that Democrats, that President Biden have done enough to address that? Because I don't have to tell you, but people who live there do a lot of driving. That hits hard.
Absolutely. Listen, inflation is affecting people who live here, people across this country. They're making different decisions because of inflation. Gas prices have gone down 20 cents in the last week here in Nevada. This is a global phenomenon. But I remind voters, when we had a chance to take on big oil and price gouging, not one Republican voted with us. So again, we have taken action to deal with inflation. Republicans want to use it as a talking point. I have yet to see their plan on what they would do differently.
Congresswoman, let me ask you about some recent NBC News reporting that essentially found that there is a lack of enthusiasm when it comes to Latinos in Nevada in particular, that many of them are saying they plan to stay at home on Election Day. Why do you think that is? And what do you say to Latino voters who may feel as though Democrats have taken their votes for granted?
Listen, I think that any group of voters should never be taken for granted, that we should never expect that they're just going to turn up, that we have to go out and meet them and talk about the issues that are important to them and obviously deliver.
So do you think Democrats should have done more on the front end before 14 days when we have this new reporting to bring Latino voters in, to make it clear that you are doing what you can to represent them?
Again, I can only speak for what's going on here in Nevada, and I will tell you that we have been out talking to Latino voters. I just went to an incredible canvas launch to make sure we get out that vote, and we'll continue to engage them as we have.
Let me ask you, because former President Obama set to campaign in Nevada. As far as we know, President Biden not scheduled to go there. That doesn't mean that won't change, but would you like to see President Biden there in Nevada campaigning with you in this home stretch?
Listen, we're looking forward to welcoming Obama here on November 1st. Listen, if the president were to come here, again, he's the president of the United States. So, but I will tell you.
You would welcome him, Congresswoman? You would welcome a campaign event with President Biden?
If he chooses to come here, we will have an event. So, but I'll tell you what's been important to voters here. First of all, we've had early voting starting already. We've seen Democrats outpace our level in 2020. We have yet to see the mail-in ballots. But I will tell you what's at stake here is actually access to the voting booth and making sure we continue to fight to protect our democracy, because we know up and down the ballot in Nevada, election deniers are on the ballot, including my opponent. So your earlier news story was about democracy at threat. And that's going to be a key motivator for voters here in Nevada.
All right. Congresswoman Susie Lee, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you. And coming up, the latest on the political turmoil across the pond. We'll have new state polls as well, showing tight races in some of the key battlegrounds. My panel joins me next to break it all down. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned at the top of our show, interest among both parties in this year's midterm elections is just sky high. And historically, increased enthusiasm means increased turnout. Take a look at 2010, when Republicans took control of the House. Enthusiasm just above 60% led to turnout just above 40%. In 2014, enthusiasm dropped, and so did turnout. But 2018, in former President Trump's second year in office, 65% of people said they were highly interested in the election, and turnout shot up to 50%, with over 100 million votes cast. This year, interest in the election is even higher at 70%, and it's likely turnout will follow, and we could see numbers that surpass the last midterm election. Those are the stakes. Joining me now is our panel, Stephanie Schriock, Senior Advisor for Strategic Victory Fund and former president of Emily's List, Rick Tyler, Republican strategist and an NBC political analyst, and Politico congressional reporter Nicholas Wu. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. So, Rick, let me start with you and these numbers. We're seeing high enthusiasm, as I just said. We're also seeing this urban-rural divide. And a lot of these numbers are a reminder of 2021, quite frankly, when you had Glenn Youngkin win the governorship in Virginia, Republicans with some big gains. So do you see it that way? And do Republicans run the risk of over-indexing, being too confident in these closing days?
Well, no one should be too confident, because both parties are not very popular, even though Republicans are actually probably less popular, but both parties are seriously unpopular. I think this will be a huge turnout election because 7.5 million people have already voted. That's a phenomenon that came with COVID. I remember I was looking at a district in Maryland, actually Montgomery County, and of 100 people, and Biden won that count overwhelmingly, but only 6 of 100 people voted for Biden on Election Day. So that's just a massive not in-person voting, so it's a little hard to predict. But I think we will have a huge turnout. The problem is the country is equally divided on many issues. Biden's not popular, Trump and his candidates don't seem to be popular. The Democrat Party's not very popular. The Republican Party's not. So I think it's going to be these marginal issues where do independents go? Where do independent women go? These things. Are there ticket splitters this time? Do we actually have people who will vote for the governor and then vote with the Republican Party and vote against the Republican in the Senate race? So we're gonna...
I'm glad you bring that up, ticket splitters. There's a real concern about that. And you talk about independent voters. Rick, Stephanie, we've seen some real swings among independent voters. President Biden in the danger zone with independents, and particularly when you look at independent women. They, just a month ago, favored Democrats more, and now it's shifted back over to Republicans.
Yeah, I think what you really got to look into at this juncture are the actual battleground races that we're in. If you look at these battleground Senate races in Pennsylvania, in Nevada, you were just talking to Congresswoman Lee, in Georgia, in Arizona, it looks very, very different. And a lot of times these Senate races, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is they kind of almost separate themselves out from anything national anyway, because there's so much money in these races and so much energy going on. And so I'm seeing that. I'm also seeing it in a lot of these battleground governors races, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, back to Nevada, where you've got the duplication of Senate and governors races. You got to really look at those states differently because there's so much more activity on the ground and on the air.
Yeah, and the action is going to be on the ground, certainly, in these closing days. Nicholas, let me ask you about something else that we are seeing in our poll. It shows that voters are not very worried about so-called morality issues. Not Democrats and not Republicans either. And look, that could potentially have an impact, particularly when you're talking about a critical race like the Senate race in Georgia, which could determine the balance of power. Obviously, Herschel Walker has faced a number of controversies. He's denied some of the allegations against him. But how does that impact a race like Georgia? What does that tell us about a race that is so close?
Well, Georgia is actually a very good test case for how much voters do care about a candidate's morals or broader concerns about their character. Herschel Walker is someone where there have been plenty of concerns raised about his truthfulness in storytelling, his record in the past and the like. But clearly, there are larger concerns here for voters heading into this election, whether it's inflation, whether it's abortion rights, and that appears to be the overriding factor, not individual candidate quality.
And one of the things that we're seeing, Republicans and Democrats both talking about the economy, but then you have Republicans, Rick, really focused on this issue of crime as a secondary issue. And I guess my question for you is, how energizing and motivating do you think an issue like crime is going to be, for example, in the Pennsylvania Senate race?
I think it depends where you live, and I think it depends on the perception that's generated crime. I think crime obviously it's a concern that people have because it affects them personally. But their personal health and safety is always a top issue, so crime is always up there. And the Democrats had the misstep of being associated with this idea of called defund the police, which was maniacally a stupid thing to talk about and to say. They tried to backtrack on that. Biden was actually very smart on this very quickly, going to New York, getting with the mayor there and talking about crime and saying, I'm not with the defund the police. But crime is a major issue, and people are very concerned about it. And when it comes to who handles crime, now the Republicans, of course, stepped in it too, calling the FBI the Gestapo, which I thought was a fairly maniacally stupid move also. But Republicans historically have done better on the crime issue when people perceive that crime is out of control.
Yeah, but the vast majority of Democrats were never of that position anyway.
No, but they were associated with it.
But they weren't. But the other piece of what's going on, of course, is the conversation still very active about access to abortion.
And I was going to ask you about that.
Important.
Do you think some Democratic candidates have over-indexed, not that they shouldn't be talking about the issue of abortion, but at the risk of not talking enough about some of those other big issues like the economy?
Oh, I think when you get on the ground and you see what's being talked about, you're hearing economy, you're hearing jobs, you're hearing education. If you're a governor, a lot of conversation about education. And you're also hearing about abortion access. Like, we can actually talk about more than one issue at a time. And that goes for both sides and all candidates. And that's really the debates that are going on the ground.
Yeah, I wonder what you make of the generic ballot, which does show that Republicans seem to have the momentum right now. I mean, it's razor tight. But what do you make of that? And President Biden Biden has said, look, he thinks there's going to be a shift back in the direction of Democrats. A lot of Democrats are skeptical about that. There's time. There is time. What do you think, Nicholas?
Well, look, even today, House Democrats are having to spend in the district of the campaign chair, Sean Patrick Maloney. They're making an ad buy there to protect him, where he was someone who they thought had been shored up, especially after we saw this surge of Democratic.
That's a stunner.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, what do you make of that?
I mean, he's still favored to win, but it would still be humiliating for Democrats if the campaign chair, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee chair, loses his seat. That's something that very rarely happens.
Yeah, Stephanie?
Well, welcome to redistricting cycle, where everything's a little up in the air and members of Congress have to reintroduce or introduce themselves to new parts of the district, and they got to make sure they do that. I was just in Kansas, actually, with Congresswoman Schriock, who also, has a new chunk of her district, made it a little bit more red. I think they maybe overplayed their hand because she is doing great out there. And so I think we're going to see some surprise wins and some surprise losses across the board because things are so close and the enthusiasm is so high. I mean, just the fact that you saw 70, have you ever seen anything like that?
No, stunning.
We are going to see historic turnout. That's going to mean different things in different places. And I really do think we're going to have some surprises on both sides.
Rick, given what we're seeing, the enthusiasm amongst Republicans, what's the biggest potential pitfall at this point in time? Here you have President Biden saying, look, he thinks it's going to shift back to Democrats. What's the concern right now for Republicans that could actually make that happen?
I think the decision's mostly baked in. I mean, we're very close now. And people in the end, I have to believe that in the end, you take all the conventional analysis, which is it's an off-year election of a president who's not very popular, inflation's very high, housing costs are through the roof, mortgage rates are very high, and people are very concerned about it. In the end, people end up voting their self-interests, and that is the economy, and that's where your poll had showed that. I thought for a while that the Dobbs decision would be up there, but it was only at 9% in your latest poll, which people were concerned about it, and then they kind of refocused on staking gas prices,
I do want to talk about something that has been in the headlines as of late, both on the part of politicians and celebrities, which is anti-Semitism. We're seeing this come out of the mouths of both. And there has been a lot of criticism of it, a number of people speaking out. It's worth noting, when you look at the numbers, 12% of hate crimes were anti-Jewish over the past decade, a far larger percent than the percentage of Jews in America. Stephanie, how do we deal with this in our politics? And it doesn't seem like there's a price to pay for politicians who use anti-Semitic language.
I think we're going to see if that price is paid by Mastriano in Pennsylvania, which, of course, just Friday sort of stepped in it once again.
Yeah, Doug Mastriano, the gubernatorial candidate, made comments that were viewed as anti-Semitic. Former President Donald Trump tweeted something or posted something to his social media site that many viewed as anti-Semitic.
I mean, it's the toxicity that we continue to see, particularly from the mega Republican part of the Republican Party, where they want to divide and divide and divide, and this is part of it. Now, the problem is it is very, very dangerous. It puts people's lives in danger, and somehow we've got to calm it down. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I hope at some point the voters find, in themselves, even though they say it doesn't matter. I'm not so sure it doesn't matter.
Rick, very quickly, the concern, this is becoming a dog whistle.
I think people ought to call it out. The history of the Jews is an extraordinary history that goes all the way back, pre-biblical history. Paul Johnson wrote an extraordinary book on the history of the Jews. They're amazing people with amazing culture. I'll be with the Jewish National Fund the weekend of the election. And it's just uncalled for, and people should call it out and not tolerate it.
I think that's a great final point. People should call it out and not tolerate it. Thank you. We could do an entire panel about that. It is a really critical topic. Stephanie, Rick, and Nicholas, great conversation. Appreciate it. Up next, breaking news on the national security front, a sting operation, double agents, and new federal charges against alleged Chinese spies. We'll explain that all next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are following multiple developments from the Justice Department, which announced charges today against 13 alleged Chinese spies in connection with 3 separate investigations. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced those charges just a few hours ago. Now, in one case, Garland said defendants who were Chinese intelligence officers directed an employee of a U.S. law enforcement agency whom they thought they'd recruited as an asset to steal information about the prosecution of a Chinese company. Garland says that employee, though, was actually working as a double agent for the FBI. Ryan Riley covers the Justice Department for NBC News and joins me now. Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you as well.
So let's start right there. Break down these charges. And is the Justice Department effectively trying to send a message to China with these charges?
I think it's very clear because, they basically rolled these 3 separate cases into one and had this big announcement with the head of the FBI and the head of the Justice Department and the number 2 at the Justice Department and a top national security official. So I think that this was sort of all time to make sure you're sending a message to the Chinese about this. But, a lot of the details of these cases are very interesting. As you just mentioned, there's this one case where there was a double agent involved. There's also a separate case involving an effort to repatriate someone back to China after they had spoken out against the Chinese. And then, there's 3 separate investigations here, all of which have details that they're trying to basically bring out here and send a message more broadly to China.
All right, well, let's talk about an unrelated case, this seditious conspiracy case against Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes. It's been delayed for a week. What do you know? When do you expect it to pick back up?
So Stuart Rhodes came down with COVID, and that could really delay the investigation here. We already had one juror who actually had to get out of the case because they came down with a case of COVID. So this could delay it potentially until Monday, potentially until Thursday. Right now, his lawyers are trying to work something out where perhaps Rhodes can call in, but I don't know if he's going to go for that because Rhodes is somebody obviously who wanted to get this case delayed altogether. So I think that giving a setback to the investigation and from moving this forward could be something that he sees as beneficial. He might want to take them up on that opportunity to delay it.
And in another case related to January 6th, a former police officer took the stand. What do you know about that? What can you tell us? And what's the big picture significance there?
That's right. So this is Michael Riley, and he's that former police officer who was on the Capitol Police and actually spoke with a Capitol rioter afterwards and said, hey, take down that content about you going into the Capitol, essentially. Prosecutors alleged trying to help him avoid charges here, and he was facing 2 counts in relation to his actions in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, and he essentially was testifying, saying he didn't really have a very valid excuse or something that he offered the jury for why he was giving him this advice, but he said he was embarrassed by what he did, and I think basically what the defense is trying to emphasize is that he's already faced consequences for this, although they're not allowed to tell the jury that he lost his job, actually, as a result of this. That's been kept out of the trial, so they've just referred to him working through, when he was eventually charged, but haven't said specifically that he was ultimately out and retired from the Capitol Police after this.
That's a very interesting detail. Well, you are covering a lot of developments. Thank you so much, Ryan Riley. Good to be with you. Appreciate your great reporting. Coming up next, a false flag warning. The U.S. and NATO push back at Russia's dirty bomb claims, warning Moscow against any escalation. We will talk to a Ukrainian member of parliament about those developments in the Russian-Ukraine war. That's after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. As the war in Ukraine enters its 9th month, today Ukrainian officials are pushing back against Russian allegations that Kyiv is preparing to unleash a dirty bomb within its own borders. Russia's defense chief made the baseless claims over the weekend in calls to Ukraine's closest allies, including the U.S. The allegations have led to renewed fears that Vladimir Putin may be using that allegation as a pretext to escalate Russia's offensive amid its struggles in the war. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is reaffirming U.S. support for Ukraine after Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy suggested Republicans would cut back on aid to Kyiv if they win the House. Today in Croatia, Pelosi also pushed back at Republicans' claims that U.S. aid to Ukraine has been a, quote, blank check. Take a listen.
We've never given a blank check to Ukraine. The Ukrainians have dealt with any assistance we have given them, and I'm sure you have given them, with great integrity, with great compliance, with great accountability, and with great transparency. So the inference to be drawn from that is we wouldn't be giving them help. That's not true. And that has been a blank check. That's not true.
Joining me now from Kyiv is NBC News correspondent Cal Perry. Cal, thanks so much for joining me. So,
hey there, good morning. Today,
let's start right there. What is Ukraine saying about the allegations of a dirty bomb?
Yeah, so look, this really started yesterday, Sunday, as you sort of laid out, the defense secretary in Russia making calls to his counterparts in the U.S., France, and the United Kingdom. And his claims were that Ukraine is going to use some kind of nuclear device, a dirty bomb, in order to muddy the waters, to raise the tensions here, to increase the war. The foreign ministry here immediately saying that, look, this is Russia's way of basically telegraphing what it is that they're going to do. This is a false flag operation by Russia. They always do this, he said. They make the threats to another country and then they do it themselves. This has long been a fear here, Kristen, that Russia could either use a nuclear weapon of some kind, especially in the south, or that they would continue to pressure sort of these infrastructure points, be it the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia, which they're under control of. We understand from officials they're torturing the staff. They could divert the power from that site. Or this dam, this hydroelectric dam that is north of Kherson. The concern is that it is now mined, according to the president. They could blow the dam and flood 30 villages. All of this is a long way of saying that Russia's plan here seems pretty clear, which is if they can't have the territory, they don't want anyone to have it at all, Kristen.
And of course, President Biden has warned there will be grave consequences should Vladimir Putin use any type of a nuclear weapon. We know that over the weekend there were attacks in Kyiv. What did you see? What did you hear? How significant was this?
Well, look, all weekend we heard air defense batteries firing. We didn't hear any rockets landing, which is, I think, a credit to the air defense, but also an indication that they were hitting targets this weekend outside of the capital. You can see, look, behind me, right? It's darker than normal. It's a very, very dark city tonight. Almost all of the lights are off. And it's worse when you get out of the capital. We were outside the capital by about 20, 30 minutes today, just at a suburb, and the power was out there the entire day long. There's a government sort of center here that still operates in downtown Kyiv, and it seems clear they want to try to keep the power on here. But look, it's becoming increasingly difficult, not just because of the strikes continuing, but because it's hard to get these power plants back up and running, these electric substations, and then, Kristen, imagine doing it under fire with drones coming in. And that's the difficulty here. Nobody knows what that tipping point is when the power goes out and doesn't come back on, but it is cold here, and it is something that people are very fearful of.
I can only imagine. You paint a really horrifying picture there. Cal Perry, thank you so much for your reporting. And I say this every time, but please do continue to stay safe. We really appreciate it. I'm joined now by Kira Rudik.
Thanks,
She is a member of Parliament in Ukraine and leader of the Golos political party. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I do want to just ask you about what Cal was just talking about, which is that 1 million people without electricity, without power. Do you have any sense of when that is going to be restored, given that we are approaching the very cold months?
Well, what we see right now is the result of Putin's plan of energy terror. And we did anticipate that something like this would be happening closer to autumn and winter. As of right now, 40%, and I want to stress it, 40, almost half of Ukrainian energy infrastructure, so plants and grids, are destroyed or severely damaged. And we are building this infrastructure, but what Putin is doing, they are attacking what we have rebuilt again. So major part of the infrastructure was destroyed at the kamikaze drones and missiles attack on October 10th. And then when we were able to restore some of the critical infrastructure, it was attacked again on October 17th. So it is extremely hard to have any prospects on when it will be restored. And what we are saying, and we are preparing Ukrainian people, that the winter will be very cold and very dark. As of today, 7 Ukrainian regions and over 1,000 of cities are without the electricity. In Ukraine, in Kyiv, we know that you can only turn on lights in one room because we are saving energy for the critical infrastructure and, of course, for the hospitals, because we cannot have outages there. But it becomes more and more hard, more and more complicated. And I can tell you from my personal experience, when the air raid sirens are on, there is a huge difference in between sitting in the basement when you have internet, when you have heat, when you have lights, and when you don't have any of that. It's scary, and especially for children who are just now sitting in those dark, cold rooms when it's incredibly impossible to explain what is going on.
Well, and I think the term that you use, energy terror, seems to sum up the horror that you all are enduring there with this attack against the energy grid. I want to ask you about Russia's claims that Ukraine will use a quote-unquote dirty bomb. How do you respond to that, and how concerned are you that this is a pretext for an escalation by Vladimir Putin?
It is definitely a pretext for escalation. We have heard it from our partners because Russian defense minister was calling U.S. defense minister, UK defense minister with the same messages saying, oh, we think Ukraine will do that. So first of all, we are open for any checkups from our international partners, but I don't think that there will be any checkups because everybody knows that Ukraine wouldn't ever do it to our citizens. And we are concerned that it is Russia's next step on escalating the situation. I can tell you, under my stairs, for my family, we have a backpack for evacuation. We have backpack for potential nuclear attack that has everything to support us, and that we will have to act if something like that will happen. We take it very seriously, and we are getting ready for something crazy like this. And this is what is important, that our allies, starting from the United States as democratic world leader, would make it very clear to Vladimir Putin what would happen to them if they will resort to nuclear.
We're also seeing Russia step up its use of drones, and you talk about your allies. Are you getting what you need? Is Ukraine getting what it needs to defend itself against these drone attacks? What is your message right now to the U.S. and other allies about what more you need?
We have received the confirmation that we will get more Air Force protection systems after 40% of Ukrainian electricity grid was destroyed. And this is super hurtful because if we receive this support earlier, this Air Force protection systems, right now we would have lights and we will have heat. So the message is, please help us protect our skies. Please give us all the necessary weapons so we can defend ourselves not only against Putin, but against winter and more destructions. It should not happen after the destructions are done, but before that. We should move to the preventive support of Ukraine rather than saying, okay, well, now, guys, you suffered again, so here is another chunk of support. I'm sure that we will win this war when our allies will switch from the reactive steps to the proactive steps against Russia.
I want to ask you very quickly about what the Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy signaled last week, that if Republicans, as you know, we have elections coming up here in 14 days, if they take control of the House in these elections, they will likely oppose more aid to Ukraine. What is your gut reaction to hearing that?
What is the plan then? Do they want Putin to win? I do not think so. I think right now it's like the pre-election statement trying to play around, which is very dangerous to do at this point. I do not see that any country would have a plan of Ukraine loses. So please, let's not live in this illusion that we can lose. We will need support, and we will need to push Russia back because we are fighting for the democracy in the whole world.
Kira Rudik, we hear the urgency in your voice. Thank you so much, and please know that our thoughts are with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Coming up next, thank you so much. From Wall Street to Downing Street, the meteoric rise of the 42-year-old former investment banker turned politician who's now set to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You're watching Meet the Press now. We now know who will become Britain's third leader in less than 2 months. Rishi Sunak has won the race for Prime Minister. NBC's Keir Simmons joins me now from London. So, Keir, set the stakes. Walk us through what happens between now and when Rishi Sunak officially becomes the Prime Minister.
Well, Prime Minister Liz Truss, who was, of course, appointed by the Queen, Kristen, will go to see the King, hand over power tomorrow, and then Rishi Sunak will become Prime Minister. These things happen pretty quickly here, and they have happened very fast. He will be the first person of colour to walk through that famous door behind me there as Prime Minister, the youngest in more than 200 years at 42 years old. He's seen as a safe pair of hands, not a particularly brilliant political performer, but he knows the economy, and that is the big challenge with, Kristen, rising prices. He's likely to have to increase taxes and cut spending. One other big political challenge for him, he is incredibly wealthy along with his wife, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Will the British people warm to him, even as he warns them that there are difficult economic times ahead? So the times are changing here once again. Many people, though, saying, particularly the opposition, not enough, saying there needs to be a general election. Kristen.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you. The challenges could not be steeper for the incoming Prime Minister. Really appreciate it. NBC News Now coverage continues with my friend Hallie Jackson, who is back right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.